We have paid tribute to many of the people who have come from across the UK to listen to this debate today, but there's one group missing, and that's many members of Haemophilia Scotland who are actually in Tayside attending the funeral of one of their members, the second of 3 brothers with haemophilia. The remaining brother has had a transplant because of liver damage. I would expect that everyone in this House would send condolences to the family. But think, this scandal has been going on for over 40 years, and people have been dying and not been recognised and not been looked after all of that time. It really is a disgrace. Now, we talk about not accepting liability. Now, the reason I've got my specs on is because I want to read some things, which, as you know, I don't normally do. A copy of a letter from a leading doctor in the FDA in America, talking about in May 1985 that heat treatment of blood products has been available for quite some time, but that non-heat treated could continue to be produced against current licenses because they weren't going to do anything about it. They could regulate it out, but they wanted things tidied up quietly. He explained that although the FDA could revoke these through regulatory process, they didn't want any attention paid to the fact that it had been allowed to go on so long. They would like the issue quietly solved without alerting the Congress, the medical community or the public. This was in 1985. I have a copy of a letter from John Major, previous Prime Minister and at that time Chief Secretary to the Treasury, in 1987, and he's writing to Tony Newton, a Health Minister at that time, raising the possible consequences of a sympathetic response to the Haemophilia Society. It could lead to an open-ended commitment of huge dimensions. It could give rise to court action against the government because of the implication of negligence. And I ask that you should consider these points with the Society, but with no implication that the government will take any action. And here we are, almost 30 years on, in almost exactly the same situation. Now, as has been mentioned frequently, this is the biggest treatment disaster in the NHS. And it comes because we were importing American coagulation products and American blood. That was blood taken from prisoners or blood units sold. Who sells their blood for donation? People living on the streets, people who are drug addicts. And the particular reason why haemophiliacs and others suffered is to make Factor 8, you had to use the blood products of multiple donors, and therefore the risk of having a positive among that went up. They also received these products over and over again in treatment of their haemophilia. And here we are all these years on. When I graduated in 1982, and through the 80s as a young surgeon, this was just beginning to emerge. This was just beginning to be discovered. And it certainly left me as a surgeon with an absolute fear of transfusing blood. I used to go to great lengths to use electrocautery and other techniques to avoid shedding blood in elective cases, because we don't know what other problems are there. Now, obviously has been discussed, and some of my colleagues highlighted the exact terms of the Scottish settlement. But the first 3 can be summarised in that people who are suffering from hepatitis C, HIV or co-infected will receive more money to bring them to at least the level of an average income of £27,000. The people who have stage 1 hepatitis C will receive £50,000 instead of 20. And those who've had £20,000 compensation in the past will be eligible to have £30,000 now. Now, is it totally accepted by the Scottish Government that only focusing on cirrhosis is a rather bizarre way to assess people? And they are totally open to an evidence-based piece of work in the future to look at how people should really be assessed. I think one of the biggest differences is this recognition of the family, the bereaved family. They will receive the money for another year and then a pension of 75% that will be lifelong. And our flexible fund will continue to be topped up to the point of £1 million a year. As was said, this is not giving people back their lives, but it can allow them to live with dignity. Now, the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland, indeed the colleague from Norfolk North, suggested in a degree of criticism that Scotland has gone ahead with this instead of looking for a UK solution. I have to say, how long should we wait? Okay, I accept. How long should we wait? Scotland was criticised because we were ready to screen blood in 1990 and we waited till 91 so that it would be UK screening of blood donations. We made that mistake then. We can't make it now. I don't have time. I'm sorry. I know that I just don't have time. Basically, I don't think we'd be having this debate with the same urgency if we didn't have the contrast to what Scotland is doing. And it isn't just the financial support and recognition. All patients with hepatitis C in Scotland for whom sofosbuvir is appropriate can receive it. And I find it shocking that people in England who have been infected with contaminated blood should have to use any of their funding to buy a drug that can increase their quality of life and reduce the risk of them giving it to their families. We're not doing it just for these patients. We're doing it as a public health measure. If you reduce the burden of virus in the community, you will reduce new cases. So a year ago, the Prime Minister and our First Minister responded to the Penrose inquiry, an inquiry that Scotland had. The UK has never had a public inquiry into this. Both of them apologised. But our First Minister has used that year to set up a group to look at changing support and ensuring that people can access treatment and that families are recognised. I call on the Prime Minister to honour his apology and ensure that patients in the rest of the UK receive the same.